interpreter. I will, and everybody is now aware that the meeting is being recorded, so it's accessible to the public at a later date. A quick thank you to those who can attend. Recognize that we're here to share in discussions and input to the development of the Land Evaluation and Area Review, or LEAR, from Mississippi Mills. The purpose of this meeting is to increase your understanding of and familiarity with the process, the values established during the process, and the results to date. Ideally, this meeting will result in recommendations and actions that can ensure that the LEAR process achieves its objectives. If we can move on to an introduction of members and guests, and I'd like to start with our guests. Bruce.
Yeah, I'm Bruce Hudson. I'm currently president of the Arnprior Region Federation of Agriculture, which takes in the Pakenham Ward, and I'm also a chair of the Ottawa Regional Soil and Crop, which takes in Lanark County as part of the group, and there's some various other things. And I'm also our primary address is in the city of Ottawa, but probably a third of my acreage is in Ramsey Ward, and the 12th line of Ramsey.
Good, thank you, Bruce. Max.
I am. I work at a nursery just outside of Perth, and my wife is a market gardener, and I am also on the National Farmers Union of Ontario Provincial Council. So I'm attending this because I have vested interest on 3 levels, other than that I'm slightly outside of the area, but my local, which I'm also the president of, it does include Mississippi Mills. So I'm here to represent the NFU local for our area.
Thanks very much for joining us, Max. Okay, in order of priority, how do we do this? Councillor is next. Denzel?
Yes, thank you. Councillor Ferguson, representing Pakenham Ward. I also farm a little bit.
Bev?
Oh, hello. I'm Bev Holmes, and I'm representing Mississippi Ward, and I like Denzel farm a little bit, sometimes too much, but enjoy it anyway.
Our staff includes Jennifer Russell, who's been corresponding with you, and Ken Kelly, and our consulting group, and also I guess our planner is Mark Rebe and Gabrielle Snow. If I could just move quickly through the committee members. Brenda, I see you're on there.
I sure am.
And Brenda is currently chair of our Agricultural Advisory Committee. I'm acting chair for the LEAR working group. Merlin, thanks for joining us. Merlin farms just outside of town and has a good dairy farm out there. Who am I missing? My name is Lauren Heslop. My background is agriculture. I farmed for close to 40 years, retired now, but still active in many agricultural operations within the municipality and the county. Have I missed anybody, or anybody would like to extend their introductions that I was a little brief on?
Lauren, could I just ask one question? Was Deb Napton invited today?
Yes, she was.
Because I just got a message from her saying she wasn't. So I'm going to text her and.
There's been a mistake if it wasn't, because she was supposed to be invited today.
Okay, so I'm going to just text her back. She's about 15 minutes away. She'll come and join us if that's okay.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Okay, I'll just text her.
Deb is actually coming in as the Ontario Federation of Agriculture representative when she is able to get here. And it may be my error that she wasn't on. All right.
Could we send her the link, please?
Jennifer, can you send that to Deb? I think you have her address.
Yeah, I just sent it.
Okay, thanks very much, Jennifer. All right. Unless there's any other introductions or components of that we should talk about or move on to ensure there's any pecuniary interest or conflict of interest or general nature that we should disclose now. If you feel you need to disclose that at a later date in the meeting, you can also do that. I would ask from a committee member a motion to approve this agenda. Denzel, thank you. Bev, thank you. Also, there's a set of minutes for the last Agricultural Advisory Committee meeting. I'd ask for approval for the motion for approval of the minutes, please. Marlon, thank you very much. Second. Bev, thank you very much. Okay, we can move on. And I'm moving a little bit quickly. Merlin is always on a bit of a time limit, which has always been great. So we try to keep the meeting down to an hour. If it extends beyond for a few minutes, that's fine. But and we'll tell Merlin what happened. But that's why I'm trying to be as quick as I can here. So we're moving on to delegations and presentations. Gabrielle, I know you've got a good presentation. If we could move to it, please.
Yep, of course. Let me just
Thank
share
you.
my screen and I'll have you let me know if you can't see my screen in a few seconds here.
Just Gabrielle, before you jump in, I was going to say this presentation was done at the last meeting, and I think we circulated the video from the past meeting. I was just wondering if people had seen that. Maybe we could jump to discussion as opposed to going through the full presentation again. But again, that's kind of up to whether people have had the time to look at the presentation. Thanks.
I guess I'd ask Max and Bruce about their thoughts on that. My feeling is that it's a good presentation to go over the major components of the study. And if Bruce and Max feel they'd like to have that time, I think we could spend that time on that. Bruce, Max?
Yeah, a quick review would be nice.
Thanks. And Bruce,
Yeah, I wouldn't mind up to speed a bit. I just got a letter from Mississippi Mills outlining the LEAR process right now in my mail today. So.
All right. Go ahead, Gabrielle, please.
And do you hear me all right? Is my mic coming in clear?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, okay, perfect. So the presentation that I have outlined for today goes over the general objectives and what land is and isn't included in the analysis, including how the evaluation units were selected and how that sort of works out in the scoring of parcels. Then we go into the land evaluation and area review factors, how they're weighted and scored and broken down to create the total LEAR score. Then, given that there's a little bit more decision making on our part for the area review factors, we'll look at how those were considered and selected and how they contribute to the total score in terms of weighting. Then I'll review some of the preliminary results, including the raw scores, how and which do exceed that threshold that allows for the consideration of parcels in the agricultural designation. And then finally, the recommended areas for agricultural designation and how, the threshold was considered in this recommendation and what else is also considered in that. So to start, the overarching objective is to identify and protect agricultural lands via the identification of both good soils and the consideration of other area related factors. So they don't necessarily contribute to the understanding of whether lands would be suitable for agriculture, but would affect a land's ability to foster good agriculture. So all lands within Mississippi Mills were used for or were included in the analysis except for settlement areas. So this includes both village boundaries and suburban developments. So as you can see here, there are some suburban developments or subdivisions that were excluded just given the nature of that land and land use, and areas as in Almont, village boundaries are also excluded from the analysis. But as you can see from the coloring here, all other parcels, all other ownership properties or individually owned properties are scored and analyzed under the LEAR. So how were the evaluation units selected? What are they? How are they chosen? So instead of using a raster analysis approach, which basically just means a parcel of land with a given area, so let's just say 100 meters by 100 meters, we decided to go with land ownership parcels as per MPAC data. And basically this just allows for a more intuitive scoring approach, and it also makes it so that full parcels are either designated or not designated. So under the current agricultural designation in Mississippi Mills, parcels are currently or could be currently partially designated, and this creates a lot of issues for land use planning in terms of consents and what is and isn't permitted on the property, and leads to confusion. So these are just a few of the reasons why we decided to go with the land ownership parcel approach. So the LEAR is made out of two different types of criteria. The first is a land evaluation, which is largely and is characterized as soil capability as per the Canada Lands Inventory data. And the other aspect to the LEAR is the area review factors. So this could include things like things aside from soil capability that could affect a property's ability for good agriculture. So this could be, you know, what are surrounding land uses, what is the property currently being used for, etc. But we'll go into exactly what factors were considered in this LEAR. The breakdown that was selected for this LEAR is 70% land evaluation, so 70% soil capability, and 30% area review, which are those secondary factors that influence agriculture. And the reason for this is that we really thought that soil capability should be the leading consideration in the LEAR, while other area related factors should be secondary. So we should really prioritize good soils for agricultural designation. And we will get into, you know, the OMAFRA requirements later, but essentially OMAFRA has given support to this breakdown of 70% land evaluation and 30% area review. And so under the land evaluation factor, which considers the soil capability, soils are ranked based on the CLI classifications under this data set. So the classification goes from class 1 to 7, 1 being the soils most capable for agriculture, and 7 being the least. And as per MAFRA guidelines, we've included organic soils in this scoring breakdown with organic scoring equivalent to class 2 soils. And this is something that OMAFRA pushed for and we integrated into the model. So the total LEAR score is out of 100 points. And as you can see here, up to 70 points can be attributed to the soil capability or the LE factor. So if a given soil is 1, then it would get the full total of 70 points. And if it's a class 7 soil, it would get 0 and kind of works its way from there. And this is a scoring breakdown that again has received OMAFRA support and mirrors the LEAR approach that they have recommended in the past and in both our chats with them and in their documentation. So for the area review factors, the three that we chose were parcel size, conflicting land uses, and the percent of a given parcel that's being used for agriculture, because we believe that all three have a considerable influence on whether a given property would be a strong candidate for agricultural designation. And in the next slides, I'll discuss each individually. So for these factors, we decided that they would each receive a total possible number of points that's the same. So of the 30 points that are attributed, or the 30% of the score that's attributed to the area review factors, each one of these factors receives a total of 10 points. So for parcel size, this is essentially the breakdown we went for in terms of parcel size and what the corresponding score would be. We adjusted this scoring breakdown based on OMAFRA guidance. Before, we made it so that it would be more difficult to score higher, which means essentially that the number of acres a given property would have to have in order to score 10 would be greater. But according to OMAFRA guidance, we adjusted this as such. And here's a breakdown of essentially how large parcel sizes are in Mississippi Mills that are currently being farmed. So you can see that, you know, less than 5% of total farms are less than 10 acres. So given this breakdown, you know, many current farms in Mississippi Mills are scored high under this given factor. But keep in mind that parcel size only contributes to 10% of the total score. So even if a farm is smaller, it's not being overly penalized or disproportionately or unfairly penalized as a result of its small area size. So the second area factor is conflicting land uses. So essentially what was done for this factor was for each evaluated factor, a radius of 750 meters was drawn around each, and the number of conflicting land uses within that radius was counted. So essentially, the more conflicting land uses there are within that area, as it relates to a given parcel or the parcel being evaluated, the more it's penalized or the fewer points it gets total. However, we adjusted this model so that, you know, there aren't that many or not a disproportionate amount of farms or parcels are being scored low as a result of conflicting land uses. So that's kind of how we came up with this breakdown here, was seeing what was appropriate for the area, but essentially properties that have more conflicting land uses within that 750 meters are scoring lower under this factor. But again, it's only scored on a total of 10 with a total of 100 points for the LEAR score. So again, it's not overly penalized if there are surrounding land uses that are conflicting in that area. So conflicting land uses would include commercial, industrial, and residential. And for active farming, we used the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's cropland data set, which basically it just shows land coverage that's currently being used for agriculture, regardless of the type of agriculture it's being used for, whether that's the growing of crops or livestock, it's all included in that. And we chose the following breakdown. So for each parcel being evaluated, we looked at what percentage of that parcel is being used for agriculture. So you can see that, you know, that's being scored very proportionately in relation to total crop or agricultural coverage per property. And we used to have a more basic breakdown, you know, looking at only maybe 25% or less, between 25% and 50%, et cetera. But we decided to go with this more elaborate breakdown, and that way that the scores attributed to each property were more fair and reflective of what was actually going on the property. And again, this is given a total of 10 points. So if a property is being used for 90% or more for agriculture in terms of its total area, it's given the full 10 points. So now I'll speak a little bit to the preliminary results and scores. So as you can see here, all parcels aside from subdivisions and village areas were scored. The lighter parcel or the lighter cells or parcels are a lighter in color, and those that are darker, kind of that maroon or brown color, are scoring higher. So these are just the raw results based on the LEAR score alone. So both the land evaluation, the soils, and the area review factors for a total LEAR score. So all of that's combined to create this. And using, you know, our total results, we were able to see what threshold was appropriate, just in terms of what we thought would be kind of the threshold for understanding which properties, based on the LEAR score alone, would be appropriate for, you know, further analysis or further kind of recommendation for designation. So this is basically the threshold we chose. What we did in order to determine this, and on top of input, was just selecting a few farms that we thought would be very suitable for agriculture and other areas that would not be very suitable, and ensured that this threshold included those appropriate properties and excluded those that we deemed inappropriate. Though this is just sort of a baseline. It doesn't necessarily mean that those that are scoring below this threshold will be excluded, or those that score either at that threshold or above will be included, but it's just a guide so that we can be more informed in what we recommend for designation. So from there, from that threshold, we were able to recommend some lands for designation. So this considers both the LEAR scores and the threshold, but also some other factors that OMAFRA recommended, including you know, the exclusion of certain lands, including provincially significant wetlands, but also OMAFRA put out there that they like to see the designation of continuous 250 hectare blocks, as this is more conducive to good agriculture, as having that designation sort of all clustered together. So between the LEAR and those ideas from OMAFRA, we came up with this area recommended for designation. So that's a total of 14,343 hectares, which, as you can see here, is actually increasing the total area being recommended for designation from almost 12,000 to above 1,400. So currently under the Mississippi Mills official plan, about 11,705 hectares are currently designated, and we're proposing that to about 2,000 more will be designated under this LEAR. So just as a visual sort of comparison, that light orange is what's currently being designated, and that overlapping green is what we are proposing for designation. But nothing has been solidified yet, and it's still open for discussion and public consultation. But I'll leave it to you all to ask any questions if you have any, and I'd be happy to answer.
Apologize, I was muted. Deb, thanks for joining us, getting in. I'm sorry we missed inviting you in the first place. That would be my error by the sound of things. I think you've seen the presentation already, so you probably got a good coverage on it. I think probably now is a good time for questions and considerations. The rest of the agenda basically indicates that there is an OMAFRA technical guidance document that's been provided, and the draft OPA 29 to date. And I see, and I think letters to affected landowners has been sent out, I understand from what I'm reading here. I have a question about that later. And I think at the last minute we got the the public input questions have been sent to us, which I just had a quick look at it, have some interesting questions already in it. But can we go back and focus our questions, I guess, on Gabrielle's presentation might be the best way. Can I move with hands up at this point until we find out with Scott?
Yeah. Hi, Gabriel. Great presentation. Enjoyed it much this time as the last time. I was just wondering, you've referenced a few conversations that you folks have had with OMAFRA, and I'm just going back to a previous meeting where I thought that you said, or someone said, that there was actually guidance that the property that was to be designated was to be increased. Did I hear that right in a previous meeting, that there was direction that there was supposed to be more prime ag land than what was previously designated, and this was direction that came from OMAFRA?
I can answer that, Gabriel. So unless something else was said, because I was part of both discussions. Well, this is Mark Rivette. Sorry, I'm my video off. I can turn my video back on here. I'm just on vacation, so if anybody walks in the background, don't worry about it. Yeah, what was basically discussed with OMAFRA was there was no plus or minus. They really, once we decided that we were going to use LEAR as the methodology, it was more in terms of what are the appropriate criteria that they're willing to accept in the LEAR criteria. So about 3, if not 4 meetings was had just to kind of go through the different LE and AR components that Gabrielle explained today to make sure that we had buy-in from them. And then there was, I think, a last little submission from them where there was one minor little technical revision to do. But in large part, the approach we took is consistent with what their methodology wanted to see, both in their technical guidelines and more specifically for Mississippi Mills, because a lot of the models that are out there were done in the Golden Horseshoe area and stuff like that. So these were really adapted for M Mills. But in terms of whether or not we're adding more lands or removing more lands, again, that wasn't really the end goal. It was really to try to, because now we're using LEAR rather than just class 1, 2, 3 soils, and the factor now that we have to include adjacent lands. So it was more of using LEAR as the model to go to the next step, which is actually designating. So the big thing to get out of this, of Gabrielle's presentation, is that even though the 66 plus parcels that are highlighted doesn't by default mean that you automatically equal an agricultural designation. It just means that you're scoring enough based on the LEAR criteria that you should be now brought to the next level of actually, and this is where I'm hoping this is going, is reviewing the actual proposed agricultural map and see if the areas that the LEAR kind of concludes or identifies is the right lands that we need to be protecting. And that's where we really need to get local, you're seeing about 150 email correspondence, but a lot of them are just questioning the things or asking to go rural because they want the consent, but not really with the thought of actually protecting agricultural lands and protecting farming in the area. So we really want this committee to spend some time and make sure they're comfortable with the LEAR component, because that at the end of the day brings us to the parcels that are being considered. But that doesn't mean, the big direction from OMAFRA means is that even if you're not scoring 66 plus, it doesn't mean you can't be designated. And even if you are, it doesn't mean you by default are designated. What they really want to avoid is having these pockets. And that's where this 250 hectare came from. So they're looking at trying to create areas, and they're totally ignoring ownership and lot lines. They're really just looking at trying to create areas where farming activity would be about 250 hectare blocks. So that's why we tried to kind of avoid really identifying what makes up the 250, because it's not really an addition. It's really kind of more of a general area. And what they're really trying to avoid is having people come out and say, well, we're poor pockets, or we're not farming, and have these areas where you're now introducing sensitive land uses in a larger area that is predominantly farming. And you guys will know the conflicts of having urban people move into a poor pocket area in the agricultural area. So that's in large part what they're trying to avoid by having that provincial definition change to not just class 1, 2, 3, but also those areas of poor pockets in those adjacent lands. So we're getting a lot of requests from 1 or 2 acre lots saying, why are we being designated? And the idea is there is that we're creating these blocks of lands and using natural dividers or rivers or highways as those dividers. But again, the refining of these is totally up for consultation.
Thanks, Mark. I think that's really important what you've just said there, because And I guess, personally, I think this is a good process. It gives us the ability to protect farmland, which is a high priority, certainly for the agricultural industry. But it opens the discussion here to say, are we choosing the right lands? Have we chosen some wrong lands? A number of assumptions were made in getting there. The criteria weighting for the two sides, how each of them was evaluated, the 250 hectare parcel size, the threshold score, or even the specifics. Are there some specific areas that we really should have a closer look at and either try to reduce the amount of agricultural lands that's there or increase the amount of agricultural land that's being considered? And I think that's where we can open up again for questions and comments from people on that are on the call here. Next hand, Bev.
Thanks, Lauren. So I have two thoughts. First of all, I think certainly in a lot of areas of Mississippi Mills, we're going to be hard pressed to find 250 hectares that's either all agriculture or mainly agriculture or mainly rural. So, I have a real hard time with that. And I guess I'll have to wait and see how that's going to fall out. The other idea or thought I had was, though, when farms were selected to decide the threshold, could we know who those farms were, and how did you test to see if they met the when you were doing the score, right? What did you use to decide a threshold? Thanks.
I could speak a little bit to that, Mark. Essentially, I couldn't tell you which properties were used now, but essentially, each parcel is individually scored based on the LE and AR criteria selected. And basically, those that we did deem as a great fit for agriculture had to exceed the threshold the thresholds that we were testing out. And there were also, lands that had poor soils and weren't really good or high scoring in terms of the area review factors. And we had to make sure that, properties like that weren't being scored high or above the threshold. So that's just kind of how we gauged our threshold, was looking at the total LEAR scores and seeing how they basically scored up based on that.
Go ahead, Beth.
So,
Bev, you may be on mute.
Okay, I think I'm off now, aren't I?
Yep.
So I guess my question then is, did you actually go visit those farms? Did you talk to people in the area, or was it a tabletop exercise?
We didn't go to the farms ourselves directly, no. Just given that this is a very kind of high level model, we would need to get individuals' feedback, during this public consultation stage to further refine our model and refine what we're looking to designate. But when we're selecting the threshold, it was all very high level, and therefore we didn't go on site.
Yeah, we got to keep in mind the LEAR model uses known data, right? So it uses the CLI mapping at 70 points, right? So we're not field verifying. I know in the 2000 exercise, Gary McTavish had done some tests on some soils to confirm the soil capability. So we're using known data sources. We're using impact in terms of land use, parcel fabric in terms of sizes, and CLI mapping in terms of soil classification. So by default, the model gives us ratings, and this is where we're now trying to get that local knowledge in terms of because the 66 is a number. It is a number, the 66 plus in terms of scoring. It is an arbitrary number, but it is a number that we just didn't pick out of our hat here. The ministry also supported that number, and it's kind of a known number. But we had tested different numbers, and the problem is once you go down to a lower number, well, the parcels add up a whole lot. For example, the whole area by Clayton, just north of Carlton Place, ended up scoring high. So you had an incredible high amount of land. Now, whether or not those should be in or not, that's why we want to kind of get direction from the committee and the public, because there was some there was some interpretation in terms of that scoring as well. And I think we had internally a number of, I think, 50%, but like I said, it almost doubled the amount of agricultural lands, just knowing, again, comparing to what the public knows right now in terms of what is designated in terms of that 11,700, and then going to a 30,000 hectares, for example, just going through, if it's not the right land, then and not the right land being proposed, then we just know it's not the right approach to be taken. So this number, not only did OMAFRA support it, and did it also include many of the larger agricultural properties that are currently designated. And I think that's where we were trying to indicate, is that most of the current large properties fall within this. And I think if we had the reverse picture of what is currently versus what is proposed, versus what is not being, because we're actually adding more than we're removing. So I think if we had the reverse scenario of what is being, if the current is overlaid over the proposed, you'd see it a bit differently. But most of the current properties that are designated and protected are not really being affected. Most of them that are designated already are being protected. But I believe Mr. Heslop will have a question in regards with the mailouts and how many that went to and who was included in there. So I think that probably will be the next question and answer. But that's what that 66 really represents.
Yeah, and just again, to echo what Bev has asked, I think if this working group is successful, we have the ability to bring the farm to the process and to look at those lands and figure out what changes might be considered. And can I just throw in a request, not a question, and I want to get to Denzel in a hurry here. One of the things that I found difficult was to actually take the map that was comparing current and recommended ag lands and see the difference between the two. They are they're green and they're yellow, and maybe it's my colors, but every time I bring that up on the screen, I have trouble seeing one compared to the other and seeing just where we added land that didn't exist before. Because certainly I know we will be questioned if we make a major increase in agricultural land, but I also know that I don't want us to lose agricultural land. Denzel, I think you've had your hand up a couple of times here.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. And I agree with what everything is said. And obviously, I certainly, first and foremost, is protect agricultural land. But looking in conflicting use of 750 meters, that's pretty significant, I think. And I trying to pose this question the last time. Is there a way around that? Should we be talking to the planning department as well and see is 750 overextending it? And then the second question that I have, and I think Mark has maybe alluded to it, and we all have asked that question, is 250 hectares a bit rich for Eastern Ontario?
So I can answer those two, Councillor Ferguson, if I may here. So the 250 hectares is the number for actually our region. It's different than other regions, but the 250 is the number that is proposed for our region specifically. And it's not parcels that are 250. It's when you start picking 1, 2, and 3 parcels, for example, that do meet all of the, let's say for this example here, the 66 threshold, and you keep on adding to those until you get to a point where it's clearly obvious that they're now scoring 50, 40, 30, or that there's a river separating the prime areas. So you just keep on adding to that 250. But if you are to start adding and all you get is about 100 hectares, well, then that's an area that, yes, has good agricultural lands. And if you were just designating it based on class 1, 2, 3, might be proposed for agricultural, but based on the LEAR methodology, it's not a large enough area that they're looking at protecting. But again, it's only a threshold, it's only a guideline. But what you saw is that we did take these areas. So what we did using the GIS was actually keep on adding. So as soon as you keep on adding, you get that 250, you keep on going, you can actually get to 300, 400, 500 in some of these areas, right? If you look at most of the proposed is very large tracts of lands, ignoring parcel fabric is what I mean. So the 250 is not a difficult number to hit once you start looking at when you start adding up or combining the 66 plus properties. It's actually a very easy number to hit. And it's when you start hitting these areas and then you get to the other side of how many start not scoring. And it's not taking an approach of which ones are less, and then you only start going green once you start hitting. It's really you take an area and you keep on adding to it. So that's why some people ask us, well, can we see the 250 hectare blocks? But it's not individual parcels. It's you start adding individual parcels until you get to that 250, and that's what makes that area. And that's why the province, if you ask the province why, they're going to tell you we want farm consolidation. We want to get away from all of these fragmented farms, and we want people. That's why the only consent process, right, is surplus dwellings, where you're basically merging farms. So the province's goal here is really to do farm consolidation and have larger agricultural properties. You know, they realize it went from larger properties to getting fragmented, to then getting poor pockets, then getting conflicting land use. So now they're taking a full 180 to that, and they really want it back to starting to protect farmlands and trying to find a way for farmers to consolidate farms and try to get away with having these little individual sensitive uses in these areas. That's really what the province's goal is. Now, it's for us as a team here to work together and see, okay, well, how do we get to that long-term goal without, you know, losing people's rights? And, you know, there's still a political approach and there's still a planning approach. So that's the 250. In terms of the 750 meter influence area or conflicting land use area, that's actually a number that was reduced. It's been a kilometer for the longest time, and then to settlement areas, it's actually been 2 kilometers in the past. So if you look at, and this is actually in the ministry's guidelines called minimum distance separation formula. So it used to always say 1 kilometer if you're in the rural areas, if you're going to introduce a livestock facility or manure facility, or vice versa, if you want to introduce a dwelling where there's actual active agricultural operations. That was recently reduced to 750, and we're not applying the 1.5 kilometers to settlement areas or clustered, you know, rural subdivisions. And we had proposed that, and the ministry said, no, we don't want that because you might be removing good farmlands that might be abutting. So there's a kind of a conflicting land use between OMAFRA and Ministry of Municipal Affairs, where Ministry of Municipal Affairs wants you to protect the right urban boundaries for urban growth and infill and so on, whereas OMAFRA is really looking at protecting the farmland, even though they abut an urban boundary, knowing that there's conflicting land uses, and their answers to that is we have minimum distance separation formulas. So this is where it gets a bit tricky for planners, where yes, we have to protect the right urban boundaries and future expansion lands, and on the other side of that invisible line, we have to protect the right appropriate agricultural farms as well. And there's examples of that in Almont, for example, when we did the urban boundary review, was really looking at which properties and which growth areas weren't going to be growing over some prime lands. And now we're actually getting comments from the next row of land saying that, well, no, we're not prime ag lands, speculating for future urban growth. And you see this in Ottawa, you see this everywhere. So that's where now you have to really weigh the benefits of the agricultural lands versus future boundaries and what is conflicting land uses.
Thanks, Mark. Can I just add a comment there? Be very careful on what you said. It's not the province's policy to support the consolidation of farmland in such a way that we now have all large farms and no small farms. That's a different direction than what I think this study is trying to do. The study is trying to protect contiguous farmland for the development of both large and small farms. We'll get into a lot of trouble if we look at any differently. Can I move quickly to our guests? Max, questions?
No, I'm okay just listening for now.
Okay. Bruce.
I guess my main question is, what is the goal of this of Mississippi Mills in terms of the planning? Are they, I know they're protecting farmland at what expense? And I guess the question is that I think you have to understand that Mississippi Mills has, every property's got a portion of it that is, I would deem marginal, I guess you could say. And a lot of those marginal plays are on road allowances and likes of that. And people have ideas for that for future, whether it's a retirement home or severance or something like that. So I I guess that's the question is from Mississippi Mills and in terms of their planning, what is the ultimate goal? I mean, I agree with Lauren too. He said that's a slippery slope if you get into the OMAFR thing about consolidating lands for large farms, because if you look at the emphasis now is to try to encourage diversity in the ag community now. That's in this, and I'll take the city of Ottawa as an example of they were trying to encourage diversity now in terms of the ag economy. So I guess that's my ultimate question is, you can follow the LEAR all you want, but what is the ultimate goal? And what are you going to try to avoid conflict? And if you are, this is probably not the process for you.
I think it's a good question, Bruce. There are some goals and objective identified, and I think I'll turn it over in a minute for response on that. But I think there's some areas that can justifiably be reviewed, and I think that's where we've got to spend some time looking more closely at some of the land. Does anyone take a swing at what is the goal and Bruce's concerns, or shall we use a later time for discussion on that?
I can give a short answer to Bruce's comment. And a big reason we're doing this is a couple of years ago we undertook a review of all of Mississippi Mills policies, so both urban, villages, rural. And as part of that exercise, the review of agricultural lands had been deferred. And the current agricultural lands were done based on a time of amalgamation in the first community official plan, and Mr. Forbes Simon and working with many residents and politicians of the day and OMAPA representatives, including Mr. McTavish, had gone through a lengthy process of trying to determine what would be the right agricultural lands post amalgamation. So with the new community official plan, and this was before the province had changed their definition of what would be considered as prime agricultural lands. And the province at that time was the approval authority for policy documents, so the community official plan. And they approved the community official plan in 2006, even though the designation was kind of in the process of being revised because Mississippi Mills had already been going for about 2 to 3 years and actually identifying the agricultural lands. And when we started our review with the province, the county then basically had its own official plan, but the county had taken more of a safe approach of just taking all of the lower tiers mapping and creating their agricultural lands based on what was existing. So they really didn't do the exercise of studying at a county level what should be the right agricultural land, because again, this was the first county, so the first Lanark County Sustainable Community Official Plan, and they didn't want to take on that exercise of actually revisiting at the county level what should be agricultural land. So they just brought into their plan all of the lower tiers agricultural land. So this 2006 mapping just kept on over the years being the agricultural lands. And when the county reviewed the recent, so OPA 21, which was the 5-year review of the Mississippi Mills plan, they basically agreed with council of the day that we will defer the agricultural boundary review until such time as we do what's called the LEAR exercise, which is where we're at today. And the large part, so the province basically says you can identify kind of in 2 different approaches, one using class 1, 2, 3 in adjacent areas, or take an alternative approach, which is LEAR, but has to be approved. The methodology has to be approved by the province. So that's what council of the day and what the current council is the tool that the current council is working with is the LEAR approach. And really the end goal is to identify lands that are the right lands. We're not looking at more lands or less lands. The quantity itself, I don't think, or the percentage, I don't think is really the big issue. It's what can be protected using the province's agricultural policies, which are built into the local plan, and I have the right lands identified, meeting today's provincial policy statements. So we're under a new provincial policy statement now. So it's really, for planners, we have to basically, and to council, we have to make decisions that conform and that are consistent with this provincial policy. So with the current planning or agricultural mapping, what is not consistent with the current approach. So that in a large part is why we're doing this is is to use a new methodology and identify the right agricultural lands.
Bev, but yeah, it's short from the council. Bev, you're on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think, when I started out in this process, and I'm brand new in council this term and learning, I thought, oh gee, LEAR sounds okay. But the more I hear about it, the more I'm not convinced. The more I'm convinced that it might not be okay. And it's almost like, we have this process that hasn't quite kept up with the times. As Bruce was saying, diversity is the big thing today. And it's not necessarily large farms. And I know a couple of years ago, Lauren and I attended a presentation by an economist, and where he was talking about the incredible economy that's been generated by small farmers. So I think we need to be very careful with what we're doing here, and take a good look. And yes, I certainly want to protect agricultural land, but I'm also concerned about those areas that's mainly all rock but there's maybe 50 acres of agricultural land in there, and will it become rural and not protected? So I think that although the past council may have thought this was a good idea, and it may have been a good idea at the time, I'm not convinced it's a good idea right now. And that's just a comment. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
if I may speak to that, LEAR would actually be a better methodology for that than using the standard approach.
Yeah.
Because LEAR, we can actually modify the different criteria that will bring this to at least what should be considered. Whereas the provincial approach, which doesn't use an alternate methodology, would basically use class 1, 2, 3 and adjacent lands. And that exercise was done. It was done when we did the OPA 21. It was done. There was actually, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, there were actual workshops and meetings in the old town hall where we had done the proposed agricultural mapping based on the province's approach of just using class 1, 2, 3 soil. So what you do is you basically take CLI mapping, you get the GIS to extract every parcel that is majority class 1, 2, 3 soils, and anything that is adjacent or abutting gets lumped into. That's the basic provincial approach. Because there they totally are going away from poor pockets or going away from partial designation. So if a parcel has even 70% or 50% class 1, 2, 3, by default of the new definition, it gets all brought in. And we had done that exercise. It's actually in the OPA 21, OPA 22 supporting documents. It was called option 2, I think, the agricultural study option 2. And that was and we could share that with this committee and its guests. It actually maps what could be if you were to use the class 1, 2, 3 and adjacent lands. And the number of lands, I don't know by memory here, but I believe it's closer to 13, if not 14. No, sorry, it's even higher than what's being done by LEAR here. Is the number that being proposed if you just use the class 1, 2, 3.
My apologies, Deb, you're here as a guest because I ask if you have questions.
Thanks, Lauren. Sorry, I'm not 100% in LEAR mode, but current class 1 and 2 land that's being pulled out. I got on the call just as I think it was said that you could still ask for those pockets to be designated class or to be designated agricultural if you wanted. Is that correct?
That's correct. So
Okay.
Parcels can be added. So again, the LEAR is just a methodology, and it's just to bring us to a proposal in terms of what could be considered. But OMAFRA is really clear that if there's areas that are known for local farming, that for whatever reason, there could be farms that are producing great crop for whatever reason, and they're not falling on the class 1, 2, 3 or soils for whatever reason. And if those are known, and they can definitely, so OMAFRA won't say no to protecting, that's for sure. But if there are known areas that are creating these 250 hectare areas that, even though they're great soils and they meet all of the different tests, there's rationale to why they shouldn't be. They are totally open to the idea of looking at area or parcel or area rationale to why they shouldn't be included.
Okay, and to have those parcels outside of the LEAR territory included, is that owner driven or is that municipality driven? Like, would the
Well, at the end
municipality
of the
ask for
day,
that? Like,
yes,
I'm
through this
thinking for us personally,
consultation.
we're just outside of Valmont, and I know there are class 1, 2, and 3 properties that are not included in this. And I understand that's just the nature of the way it is designed. And I'm just wondering, could those property owners have their properties included, or is that something the municipality would do?
So for sure. So through this consultation process, if they're right now, we're not having anybody propose to be added. You know, let's not kid ourselves here. Anybody that's commenting right now. So since we did the mail out, I believe the mail out was received probably last Thursday. We probably got about a dozen, if not more, calls or emails, and it's usually people that are either ag and don't really mind about staying ag because they know there's no consent opportunities, or they are ag properties that want to go rural, with seeing the potential of severing. Right, we're not having so far, unless I'm wrong, and I have to go back through. You know, I've been on vacation for a few days, so I haven't really, read everything. Gabrielle's been getting these as well. I haven't seen too many people say, leave me ag. I want the additional restrictions. But for sure, if there are areas that are known, and we did look at cross-jurisdictional properties as well, where there are farms, for example, in Ottawa or Beckwith or other McNabb that might be kind of coming into our lands. And those are a bit more difficult to do just with the GIS if we don't have the GIS for some of the abutting municipalities, but it was something that our GIS person looked at as well. And a lot of those by Clayton, for example, there are some class 1, 2, 3 soils there. A lot of them ended up being either smaller parcels, and there wasn't that, you couldn't keep on adding to get 250 hectare areas. But again, there could be areas there that might have 100 hectares, and if we feel that, yes, that's appropriate, and that, yes. So at the end of the day, council, this committee would be providing a recommendation to the committee of the whole, which would then make its way to council. So council would be adopting a bylaw, which would then be sent to Lanark County. So Lanark County is then going to go through our methodology, our written submissions, how we've addressed all the written submissions, input from OMAFRA, and then they are the approval authority at the end of the day. Okay. So there's still, there's many steps and many consultation steps to get to an approval. But for sure, this committee can provide recommendations, and that's why right now we're not really going the formal way of a committee of the whole direction to council. We're still in working, if I can call it working mode with this committee, and seeing what can be revised so that we are comfortable in presenting something to committee of the whole, which would then make its way to council. So we're still in a working mode, if I can call it that.
My sense is that there are opportunities, and I've heard them from a number of people here, to add land, but it would also be possible we should be looking at maybe land should be taken out if it doesn't make sense, so we don't make that number too significant. Brenda, I see your hand up there.
Yes, I'd kind of like to jump back to Bruce's question. I really liked one thing in particular, and that is relating back to the ultimate goal of what we're actually doing here. And I think that that's perhaps a matter of perspective at this point. As a farmer, I'm obviously in favor of preserving agricultural lands, but I don't think we're going about it the right way. I think the province and municipality maybe have different goals, and those goals are different from the farmers who have significant investment in the land and more specifically knowledge of the land. So I think some perspective from maybe Ken Kelly and more from Councillor Holmes and Councillor Ferguson on what their goals are to kind of guide the municipality on this would be quite interesting to me.
Okay, I think you've posed a question there. We want to get some answers to that, or we, Denzel or Bev, do you want to respond to that, Denzel?
Sure, no problem at all. Well, a couple of things, Brenda. One, guidelines has been mentioned twice, and I'd like to know how flexible the guidelines are, obviously. to see where we can go, and also the consistency with the PPS. And I've aired this before, that do we have to be consistent with the PPS without challenging it a little bit? And I guess to ask, or to go back to Bruce's last question, are we doing this to avoid conflict? Well, I hope we're doing it to get it done right, I hope, and I don't know where that answer is going to lie, but I have no problem with conflict on it, but I think we want to get it right, and we want to find out that exactly where we want to go with it. So I don't know whether that's beating around the bush or not, but that's my take on it, Brenda.
Bev?
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, I agree with what you know has been said by Councillor Ferguson. We need to know what we're doing here, and I'd like to know exactly what the guidelines. We hear, yeah, they're flexible, but how flexible? We're hearing that they're supposed to be 250 hectares, but maybe we can make it less. You know, if there's a 100 hectares, can we designate that as a parcel without designating, you know, the other 150 acres of rock and bush in with it? I don't know. I think there's a lot of unknowns here, and I'd sure like to have more information as we go forward. And also, I still am really questioning, you know, the whole business around, you know, how did we derive at our, you know, our scores and our thresholds and you know, I think there's a lot of questions yet that haven't been answered. Thanks.
Just a quick comment. We're now at 1:35. We're over the hour. I think perhaps one of the objectives of today's meeting is to create questions and thought rather than get all the answers. And so I want to just make sure we've gotten around the table here. Brenda, we got you, Merlin, questions, comments?
Not today, Lauren.
You're okay?
Yep.
Can we talk about next actions for a little bit here? Because I think there's a fair depth for answers for many of the questions that have been asked here. What's the flexibility? What's the PPS and enforcement on this? If we add land, should we consider eliminating land? I'd like to see this move into another kind of a continuation of this meeting rather than make this one another hour and a half long. Does that make sense to attendees and participants that we have another one somewhat soon? And I know we've got busy people all the way around the table, and we've got people that are taking holidays. But does it make
Mr.
sense?
Heslop, if I'm,
yeah, sir, Mark.
If I may, what I'd propose maybe is again, so that there was, in terms of the consistency with PPS, we're already using an approach which the municipality has flexibility, right? Because there's two approaches. One is, sorry, let me just decline this call here. There's two approaches, right? Like I mentioned, and the first one is more strict, right? It tells you really class 1, 2, 3 and adjacent land. But the other one is the LEAR methodology, which now we can work with OMAFRA and adapting it to what we feel is appropriate. So this is a great tool for you guys, in that you guys can adapt it. What we've proposed to you is what OMAFRA says yes, because the province says it has to be an approved methodology. So LEAR is an alternative, but it has to still be approved by, the methodology has to be approved by OMAFRA. So what we've presented to you is basically taking all of these different criteria, putting it into one program and showing you an output. The output doesn't mean that's the conclusion, right? So I think what might be helpful is if we were maybe, I know what we tried to do with because of COVID, it was difficult to do open house sessions and then actually have like a working charrettes where we have the maps. You know, the best thing here would have been to have a whole bunch of tables where we show you the current and the proposed and using local knowledge, and you guys actually telling us, well, no, this area, you know, we should carve this area out and this area. That's where I see this next step, is you guys telling us, we see what the LEAR is proposing or is resulting in terms of a color. But I think maybe what we could do is we could actually maybe make some hard copy prints for members of the committee and the guests, and you guys would have those in hand, and then maybe you guys can actually meet and do a first cut at what your comments would be in terms of what we are proposing based on the LEAR scoring. And then we can get into further discussion in terms of what should actually be shown on the actual Schedule A, which is going to be in the official plan. Because I don't think we need further discussion on the LEAR unless you want to see alternatives, because we change numbers, we change scoring, we change criteria. At the end of the day, it's going to come up with a map that shows you something. It's to take that and actually come up with that Schedule A, which is going to be what is going to be identified as agricultural lands. That's the key, right? That's where we're going with this, because the approval authority, being Lanark County, will not be approving LEAR. They'll be approving a schedule. They'll be approving Schedule A, which is what's going to be showing what are rural lands and what are agricultural lands. The LEAR will simply be a background report to that to justify how we came up to our proposal. The more local knowledge we have in it, the more we can. The only thing we have to keep in mind is in this committee is why it's great to have this committee rather than have a developer interest. This is geared by an agricultural committee and key experts, which is great because this will help us if we were to remove or add. We can easily come up with a justification with you guys in terms of why we did what we did to divert from just plugging in the numbers from LEAR, right? So I think the next step is we could do these hard copy prints. You're talking basically just the existing Schedule A and the proposal, and which is basically in the OPA 29 right now. But I think if you have a hard copy, that might be easier. And then I don't know if you guys can meet in person or not. I don't know what the rules are anymore nowadays, and or if you guys still do it via Zoom and share screen in terms of a specific area. Maybe if you break out the municipality in 4 areas and have 4 little workshop sessions and go through them that way or something. And if you come back to us and say, okay, look, we see your proposed schedule, we would propose these changes, and here's the rationale, the province won't have an issue with that. And as long as we have a good rationale to why we removed areas or why we're adding areas, and that's I think a good approach. There is another tool out there, but again, if you're not used to using GIS or computer mapping, it's a bit of a newer thing. But we did create, and it is on the website. And Jennifer, maybe you can resend the link to the ArcGIS software. It's very, very user friendly if you dare to try to use it on your computer, but you can actually turn on the layers. You can actually see the existing agricultural, you can see that rural agricultural overlay, and you can even turn on the proposed. So you can actually see that way what is being proposed versus what's existing, and even in terms of satellite imagery or existing land uses or zoning. So it is a very, very powerful tool. And it has been created for the public and this committee to use as well to assist in this exercise. So feel free to use that. But again, not everybody's comfortable using ArcGIS online and then turning on layers and seeing what's happening and everything like that. And but again, I think what I could do is maybe through Jennifer is send you via mail old school hard copies here, and you guys would see, and then. Because I'm assuming, I think the streets, lots and concessions, we can probably turn those on, and I'm assuming most of you guys know probably like the back of your hand different areas of the municipality where you don't really need to use GIS. GIS is good for us because when people call us over the phone and say we're at concession 12, Ramsey Road 12B, and then we're like, oh, okay. So for sure, GIS is great for us because we get to zoom in right to your area and zoom out and do that individual, because like I said, we've probably have over a dozen calls since that mail out. I know we don't have a whole lot of time, but just that mail out was kind of an additional way for those that either don't have internet or email or aren't really following the process to actually get something in the mail. And what we've done is I think it was over 600 people were contacted. And it's either those parcels that were going from ag to rural or rural to ag, or that had a partial designation and were being touched either way. So either partial rural, partial ag, and we're going rural, or we're going ag. So we did a specific letter to them, letting them know whether or not they were going. So we basically created mailing labels using GIS. We were able to extract which ones are going ag or full ag or vice versa. So that letter went out to, so maybe some of you on the panel here have received it. So hopefully it was clear, and it just provided the link. Initially, we had actually thought of putting the OPA 29 and some mapping in there, but then when we realized it was 600 parcels, it became a little bit too much of a big exercise. So my name's on the letter, and then, like I said, I think right now we got about 12 requests, but I think only people are just probably getting it over the weekend and stuff like that. So we're trying to offer that kind of personalized response as well. But again, it's up to individuals as well if they want to know about consents and things like that. We can give them policy, but we're not going to be doing planning work, you know what I mean, in terms of planning consultant work for individual properties. But we can give them what the policies are and what's being proposed in terms of change of policy. But again, and this committee knows that between agricultural and rural designation, there's not a whole lot difference. Mostly in Mississippi Mills, it's almost the same policies, same uses. And the only really big difference is in terms of the consents. And so that's another thing to consider. There's not a whole lot of big difference between agriculture and rural. Farming can happen irrelevant of what planning says.
Ken, I see your hand up over there. Is that?
Yeah, sure, Lauren, if you don't mind. I can see you're trying to kind of wrap things up, or at least trying to figure out where to go from here. So
I think it's important.
I was going to suggest, why don't you and I and maybe Mark and Gabrielle schedule another meeting, and maybe like just the four of us, and or whomever else you want to have from the committee involved there, and let's figure out how you want to do this this piece on the input, because you can kind of get a sense that the LEAR report using the data sets that we have is, it's going to spit out a model and an output, which is what has happened. Now it's time to get the on the ground information about how do we round out some of the edges, or are there things that are missing and things like that, which, as Mark is suggesting, is probably only going to happen when we get maps in front of people and you start talking about actual parcels and things like that. So maybe, Lauren, why don't we figure out how that's going to happen, because that's the stage that we've been trying to get to for a few weeks now, which is getting this like moving past the data sets, because the data sets are created in Toronto, right? We can't argue with them. Right? It's a waste of time for us to bang our heads on what the data set is and where it goes and things like that. As Marcus said and Gabrielle has said, we have the opportunity, once OMAFRA signs off, which they've agreed to what you're doing, then you can start working in this information about, oh, you forgot about this, or this doesn't work here and stuff like that. And that's what we need to do. So let's talk about whether it's going to be a virtual session in the next meeting, whether it's going to be maps on tables. We're starting to get some feedback from people. I think Mark and all of us are starting to get a sense, okay, is it time now to do a design session or a charrette or a town hall meeting? And can we do it physically, or do we have to do it individually? And like Mark was saying, maybe we need to break this up into 4 sessions. Like, let's have that chat and then and see where that goes, about how logistically we want to do it. I don't think we need to drag the whole committee through the logistics, but if you want to, that's fine.
If we've dragged the whole committee through what, an hour and 20 minutes or whatever we are now on process, and I think what's come out of there I think it's been valuable. I think there's been enough questions about what is the goal, that one of the things I'd love to see come out of this is an elevator speech goal that we can actually respond to people, because I think there's questions there. But I think the more important thing right now is there is flexibility. We don't have to call ourselves unique. I never like doing that. I think what we have to do is tell ourselves that agriculture is important, and we need to make sure that we do this. If we're going to do it, we need to do it right. I think the guidelines have eased up a little bit. We can probably meet at a respectable distance. Some of us can, some of us may not want to, and I don't blame them. But yeah, if the group around the table is agreeable by consensus, then I would like to take Ken up on his offer, and we'll look at a meeting of a few and see what is available and possible, and then get back to the group and see what we can do from there. Does that make sense? Do I see, and I'm looking for people if they got questions or or concerns right now? Scott, was that a concern or was that a consensus?
Well, I'm just all for the next time we all get together as a large group that we're all ready to throw our cards on the table and get down and drill down into this. Like
Yep.
So I'm agreeing with what Ken and Mark have proposed. I think
Excellent.
the next
Excellent.
time that we meet as a large group, we need to
Yeah.
delve into this and get down to some specifics.
I think, you know, it's a large group. If I look forward, it's going to raise a question. And Gabrielle, I hope we have you with a computer there, because sometimes the question can be answered really quickly by just manipulating a little bit of data or looking at something as a what if. So, but, and I think that can make it satisfactory to all of us. So I would like to say we're getting close. If I look at the agenda, there's not a whole lot else there. There's attachments that you may want to review by the next time. But if you agree, we'll get together as that small group or some resemblance thereof and get back to you fairly shortly.
So
Anybody
Lauren,
else? Yeah,
could you
Ken?
and I meet before the end of the week, Lauren, you think?
You betcha. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. We'll talk to you very quickly, Ken.
Bruce has his hand up, Lauren.
I'm sorry? Brenda?
Bruce has his hand up.
Bruce. Yes, Bruce.
Sorry. We've talked primarily on the 250 hectare. Is there scenarios based on 50, 100, 150, whatever different scenarios that, because I think that's one of the questions that people are going to ask, is that have you reviewed the other scenarios that, and how does that reflect on land and land use?
I heard from Mark the word flexibility, and I've heard concerns from this table and from others that 250 hectares may not be totally appropriate for this study. We may want, and it may turn out to be, we may want to look at either an optional number or some exceptions. I think those are the opportunities we could probably look at.
So, but the question is, Lauren, is that information available, like in terms of right away, or does it have to go through a whole new analytical process, or is it just means hitting a button and all of a sudden you're 50 hectares?
I would think it's a fairly big button, but I'm not just sure.
That was my question.
Gabrielle, you're holding back on your facial responses to his question right now. Mark?
Yeah, it is a big exercise because it is a bit of a formula approach, right? And the more you go, well, the smaller you go, the more lands we're going to bring in.
Yeah.
Right. If we go down to 100, 150, for example, all of those lands by Clean and Lake would most likely end up coming in. So you might be adding another 5,000 hectares of land. So it is, you know, I think right now, most of the comments we're getting are based on individuals' properties, concerns of the smaller parcels being brought in where they don't really understand. And the area, the issue we're having there is with that adjacent lands criteria from the province. So a lot of the requests we're getting now is, I have a 1 or 2 acre parcel. Why am I being brought in as agricultural lands? And it's hard to explain to those ones that this really means nothing for you because you're not going to be getting consent rights or 1 or 2 acres. And by being designated agricultural or rural has really no significant change because the permissions are there. If you're already residential will be permitted. There's really nothing different that happens, but it's just that explanation to people that even if you're being brought in, unless you're a large parcel and you think that you do want to have consent rights, that's where, you know, for sure you're going to be losing consent rights if you go agricultural. But the 10 acre parcels and things like that, this has really no significant change for them.
I think that needs to be clarified a fair bit, because if it's just, hey, no, you won't be, but you might have to fight with a lawyer to get it out again. That may be one thing. If we can ensure as we go through the process that they aren't affected, I think that would be a better thing. Yeah. Okay. Unless I see another hand waving at me quickly, or Mark, your phone just came on again. Unless I see any objections, I would ask for adjournment at this time from the committee.
I move to adjourn.
Brenda, Warren, Scott, we've got motions, we've got secondaries. I think we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for patience on a very complex meeting.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks very much.